G'day guys, welcome to the Unity Gym live stream for today. Something a bit different. My name is Phil White and I'm from ADPT Physio and I have taken over the live stream. So hope you're happy to have a fresh face here and not having the Burmeisters in the house. So today it's just Richard, Lilies and I. So pretty exciting, a bit different. But
Yeah,
really looking forward to
no
having a
Rad or
chat.
Yanni. We don't need
Yeah,
Rad or Yanni. It's just the
the,
Phil and
the
Richie show.
cats. Oh yeah, the cats are out, the mice will play. That's how the saying goes. Anyway, so today we're answering a question from one of the welcome posts that Rad did on the UMS Movement Mastermind. And if you're not part of the group already, what are you doing? Jump over there. It's free. Lots of free resources. That's where this goes live, as well as the Unity Gym YouTube channel. So today we're going to be answering a question from one of the new members on there, but it looks like he's been following Unity Gym for a while. So I'll just read out the important part of the question, but it's basically about the idea of whether or not aches and pains should stop you from training, and if that's sort of normal when you are starting your training journey. And for those that don't know, I'm a doctor of physio. I've been training for a long time and had aches and pains for a long time, and have learnt all about it during my sports science and physio degrees. So I'm going to be giving a bit of insight into the types of pains that you maybe want to look out for and seek medical attention, and otherwise things that are probably a bit better to or probably okay and expected to work through. And just got to chuck in a disclaimer here. Please don't take this as medical advice. Obviously, I'm not doing a consultation directly with you. So this is hopefully just giving you the right kind of questions to ask and the right sort of knowledge to take into your own medical or health practitioner consultations so that you're all really well informed. So we'll go through Drew's question. So he says, now I've gotten back into training regularly for about 3 to 4 months. I've decided to focus on mobility and flexibility, which are big issues for me. I had seen your flexibility blueprint a few years back and thought it was very smart, but never actually got around to doing much of that. Is the blueprint still available for people, Richie?
Um, no, it's not actually. It was a thing in the past, but now we're not
There
doing
you
it.
go. Yeah, fair enough. Now that I'm getting back in getting strength back, I'm starting to feel aches and pains coming back, mostly in my knees and hips, which have considerable arthrosis for my age, which is 33. So I made a decision to prioritize taking care of my body so that I can stay active for longer with my kids and eventually maybe even grandchildren. I just got the new flexibility masterclass one and also joined in on phase one in the brand new app. I just did day 3 of week 2, and so far I'm loving the workouts and my bodies feel great. Once my flexibility and mobility have improved to a satisfying level, I want to also start training for calisthenics. So that's I think probably a pretty common new Unity member experience, I'd say. Like lots of people sort of came in with that idea of wanting to get flexible and mobile, and now are sticking around to then try and work on that sort of strength and calisthenics sort of goals. So yeah, I think a
Yeah, it's
pretty
something
good
we commonly hear.
representation.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And I think where I probably want to start off with this is just to clear up some terms. So where he said he's got XPAs coming mostly in my knees and hips, which have considerable arthrosis for my age. So arthrosis is another word for arthritis or osteoarthritis. When it comes to arthritis, there's two main types. It's going to be the osteoarthritis, which is your kind of classic like weight bearing joints. People often refer to it as wear and tear. There's a bit of a backlash around using that sort of terminology. But yeah, basically the idea that you've got some cartilage and joint surface changes from, which by 33 is a really common, that most people, if you scanned their weight bearing joints, you'll start to have some signs of osteoarthritis. So the other type of arthritis that is seen is like rheumatoid arthritis, which is more in your kind of smaller joints like your hands and fingers, and that's sort of more of an autoimmune disease. So just to be really clear, there's also other things like psoriatic arthritis, but when we're talking about arthrosis here, that's just osteoarthritis, which is your classic weight bearing joint changes. So I've currently I'm doing a big focus on running. I've just kind of got back from a unfortunate injury where I slipped over and hurt my knee, and I got some scans in that because of the traumatic nature of that injury. And I've been really focusing on sort of the like running rehab, and I just came across a really interesting study where they're talking about the idea that with people who have these changes, like if you're a runner, a lot of people think that high impact is likely to cause this sort of wear and tear and breaking down of joints, but they found that actually if you're a runner, you almost have like half the likelihood of having that arthritic like change. So a lot of people sort of have this idea that this wear and tear and the more you do with your body and things like impact are bad for it, but really the joint surfaces are such a live structure that really respond to load, and that load is such an important load and impact are really important stimulus to look after your joints. And so I just wanted to point that out. And with Drew talking here before in his paragraph, he's saying he's just done 5 years of university, got my master's degree in pure mathematics, and has young children. So that kind of maybe would suggest someone who's probably spent a lot more time being inactive. I can't imagine doing a pure mathematics degree. I can't imagine how much time that would take of
Yeah, and
studying and
kids.
sitting
So
around and kids. So obviously harder to have that exercise history. So some people might often think that if you've been probably doing less, then you're less likely to have arthritis. But there's so much evidence now to show that there is a really important um, inflammatory component even to osteoarthritis, where if you have a unhealthy sedentary lifestyle, that plays a huge role in osteoarthritis as well as the more autoimmune ones as well. So that's a bit of an overview. Do you have any questions, Rich? You can just catch me before I.
I was just going to say whether it's like, I think you sort of cleared up there. I was going to ask whether it's more common for someone to have arthritis if they're exercising or have been exercising through their younger years, or less likely if that happened.
Yeah, there are certain like injuries that you can have, like having an ACL rupture, that then kind of predispose you to be more likely to have
Mm.
arthritis at a later age. So that can be a kind of secondary effect of, if you play a sport where you're more likely to have a traumatic thing like that, then you could probably get earlier onset arthritis. But yeah, there's evidence is really clear that being active, having a combination of weight bearing, high impact things like running as well as resistance training is the key to having healthy joints, because again, they are very alive structures that adapt to what you spend your time doing, and as long as you've got the right amount of stimulus and the right amount of recovery, then happy days.
There you go, another win for exercise. Woo!
We
Hear
did
a
it.
lot of people
um,
argue that exercise is actually not healthy, and I'm just like, how does that even register in your brain? But there you go. There's
yeah,
another win for
and
us.
yeah, and it is just an unfortunate reality of how often this sort of stuff is communicated, and the understanding has changed so much over the last 20-30 years in even in just like medical science. And you still hear old school doctors kind of talking about how you should avoid like everyone's like, oh, you're injured, you should just go swim. And it's like, no, impact is
Mm.
the key loading stimulus you need to not only maintain bone mineral density and cartilage health, but also then stimulate regrowth. And yeah, anyway, it's a massive topic, and we'll I'll try and not go down big rabbit holes. But yeah, it is
We'll
such
get
an
too far.
important thing to understand that yeah, like I often talk about how exercise is like a medicine. If you get the right dosage, you're going to have a great response. You can definitely overdose on exercise, and both you and I have done that plenty of times where you overdo it and you end up sore and potentially having some injuries. But if you get that dosage right, which is going to be the amount of stimulus plus the amount of recovery, then it's the healthiest thing you can do for yourself. And there's it's come up quite a few times in both my degrees talking about, like, if you could, they basically list all the things that exercise does for a body, and if you could make a pill that did that and sleep, like, pharmaceutical companies would be all over it and make zillions of dollars, because nothing else has such good upside and so little downside as exercise and good sleep. So there you go. Now, I guess going into this, he said he's starting to feel aches and pains coming through mostly in the hips and knees. And I think just talking now about, like, when you have gone from probably being a bit more sedentary to then starting exercise, it's really common to then start to get some niggles. And what I want to highlight and so a really actionable thing for you guys is try and give you a way of considering the type of symptoms you're feeling, and see if that's something that you should definitely go and get medical attention for and really get a clear diagnosis and prognosis, or if it's something you can probably leave a bit longer and that's an expected part of the journey. So maybe the best way to do this is with maybe a little plug for my own podcast. I've recently started a podcast called The Things I Wish My Patients Knew, which is, as the name suggests, all the stuff that I find myself talking to my patients most about in the clinic. And I try and do that or in my online consultations. And I've tried to put this podcast there so people can get all that background information, and then I can work on implementing all of the stuff instead of doing the education side of things. And in that episode, I did a big sort of discussion on all the different signs and symptoms. So all the different things you might feel in your body, and the kind of behaviors of those symptoms, and how they might uh, give you clues around um, if this is something that a physio can help you with, or if it's maybe something you should see a doctor for, or even go to the emergency department. So I won't go through all of that again because that's going to be half an hour in itself, but I might just put a link up to that if you guys are interested. And I've also listed out a blog with all the symptoms on there. But I think the best thing to kind of think here with symptoms is having an idea of your irritability. Now, irritability is a term that physios use where it's the idea of basically how intense does the pain get. So if you're thinking 0 to 10 scale, 0 being no pain, 10 being the worst pain of your life, the intensity is going to be how high on that scale does it get. So is it a niggly little 3 or 4, or is it a 8, 9, 10 horrible pain? Then the second part of the framework is how quickly does the pain come on. So is it a really instantaneous thing that if you're Drew, for example, if you're getting into doing a squat, is it as soon as you go into that position, it causes this high intensity searing sort of pain, like it comes on really quickly? Then that's probably a sign that maybe this is something you should go get checked out. And then the last thing is how quickly does it settle down? So this lingering of pain can give us clues about how how important it is to then also go get that checked out. So if you've got something that's really quite intense, comes on really quickly, and then takes ages to settle down, we think that of that as being a really quite an irritable structure that we want to then try and deload by looking at the variables and looking at the aggravating factors that set off those symptoms and withdrawing those a little bit. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, if it's a pretty low level pain that comes on pretty slowly and then goes away as soon as you're out of the position, then it's probably something that's just a bit of a flare up, and you're unlikely to have any big issues. Now, looking at of all those three, one of the kind of best indicators of something that you should get checked out is that lingering idea. If you have something where you do a particular motion and you get this pain that then just doesn't go away for ages, then use that as the most sort of sensitive of those three. Does that make sense to that?
Yeah, it makes sense to me. It's I ask myself the same thing whenever I get injured. Like, it's always a bit of a confusing thing, even for someone that's been training for so long. So it's good to hear your sort of explanation on that. And just yesterday during my squat day, I was getting a little bit of knee pain for the first time in months. This is something I've had before. Previous months, basically patella pain, and I get it whenever I squat down nice and low. And but afterwards it's fine. Like today it's fine, but it's only when I really get down into that low squat position, especially for front squats, because it's so knee dominant. So going back to your sort of talk, what should I be thinking if it's that sort of scenario? If it's just in that particular
So I
range of
guess
motion and not too much afterwards, should I be worried about it? And what are the sort of steps I should be taking to help it out?
Yeah, and I can imagine in that situation, like you probably would have had a fairly high amount of pain. It probably would have come on like pretty quick when you're in that position. And so looking at that framework can be a bit confusing because you think, oh, geez, that's probably something really bad. Then I got to get it checked out. But that's where that sort of lingering, how long does it hang around, really becomes the sort of important variable to give context to that pain, because I can't imagine how many times I've had weird stabby pains for
Yep.
like that just go away straight away. I never think about them again, but it just kind of pops up. So that's a totally normal thing that just happens in training, but it is that lingering, that sort of going from like a sharp like a sharp pain to then, staying pretty intense and then going to a dull ache and then just sort of being ever present. Like those are the type of things that make you think, okay, I really need to get that checked out.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
Yeah, that makes
so
sense.
yeah, I think if you have it sort of a one-off and then it goes away and doesn't come back, then like a bit annoying, but yeah, probably not
Not
too
too
much to
much to
worry
think
about.
about, but yeah, if it lingers the next day, so say today if it was really sore and aggravated, then I'll be like, okay, now it's time to see somebody.
Yeah, but even lingering for like the rest, even like a minute of lingering is quite a considerable amount of lingering. Like there's
Yeah,
a sort
okay.
of a difference between even just having like a random sort of stabby pain that then goes away and never comes back, and but even like a minute of like, oh, I've maybe done something there, and it's like it's still quite sore even when you get out of that position of aggravation. Like that's kind
Mm,
of enough to make you think like, oh, potentially there is something there to go get checked out, and if it hangs around for a couple of minutes, an hour, the rest of the day, and then into the next day, like that's a real sign that it's worth getting that checked out, because again we do want to just make sure that you know what you're working with so you can make a really informed choice about um, how to get past it and not make it a thing that becomes a big issue, because one of the biggest predictors of future injury is past injury. And so if you do let something kind of build into something that is an injury, then it becomes so hard to get on top of this kind of cycle that people go through of boom and bust, where they get really enthusiastic for training, kind of hurt themselves, and then take a bunch of time off because of injury, and then come back and then try and make up for lost time, do too much, and then get sore again. And it becomes this like really tricky cycle to get through. And I know, Richie, you've got some challenges at the moment where you're having a bit of a
yep.
bit of the
It's
bust at the moment.
it's like the entire right side of my body is going, nah, you're 33 now.
No.
It's time to experience more pain.
Yeah.
So I'm right there with you, Andrew. At 33, feeling it. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I go through these niggles and everything as well. And I think it's important that people know that, even if you're, a well-trained person that has been, training for years and knows all the technique cues and things like that, you still get these things. And it's important, when you do get these things that, again, like we've been saying, get it checked out if it's that sort of seriousness, but also not to stop your training if you are experiencing some sort of pain. There's many different things that you can do to continue exercising. It doesn't have to limit you. So for example, like with me and my knee, if I'm getting a lot of pain in my front squatting, I might just change the type of squat that I do, and see if that helps, see if that works. If it's pain in your shoulder, then maybe it's just a technique, a quick technique change out of something that you're doing to another exercise that might help completely negate the pain, but still keep you moving.
Yeah, and I've talked about it a few times on this podcast, and again on my own podcast, the Things I Wish My Patients Knew podcast. Have talked quite a few times about the different variables within strength training that we look at, and it's often just one or two of the variables that is aggravating. So, like
Mm.
Richard's talked about here, it's really clearly that deep, like loaded deep knee flexion, and that if he does a different style of squat, so potentially even a front squat just to 90 degrees, or a high bar or a low bar where you aren't quite as knee dominant, then that can be much more comfortable for people, and you don't have to then stop squatting. You're still keeping your squatting in there, but you're just using that understanding of what aggravating factors you have, and then think about how do you go from your current state of flare up to then being gradually building things back up. So the key kind of takeaway, I guess, from this is like there's always something you can be doing. And I love, like, I don't work for Unity Gym. I'm been working with you guys for a long time, and I've had a bit to do with some of the programming, but I've just loved the framework that you guys have around like the fundamental movements you have to tick off. And what really works well for a kind of rehabby context is that there's like having that framework means that you can just think, okay, I've got to get my sort of squat and calf raise on the Tuesday. Like I know if you've got some knee issues, then you just think, okay, what are some ways that I can load that same system, but without like with just not address like not having those particular aggravating factors. And then that way you can, that's where working with a health practitioner, someone who knows this stuff really well, can help identify those factors. But you can still get the training response you're after, but just by changing those variables a little bit. So yeah, really love working with the Unity guys, and I found it much harder now. CrossFit gyms moved in, and their programming is just chaos. Like it's amazing; they do really hardcore workouts, and there's some really fit, incredible people there. But trying to program in rehab into a training style where you're just doing so many different things every day that are all, um, yeah, really it's a bit more challenging to work around.
Yeah,
So I think
I
with
imagine
this
that.
system, hopefully you guys can start to realize just how well you can get in this idea of like even just a minimal viable workout, like the fundamental stuff, just done really simply to still keep moving forward. And that's how you stop that sort of idea of boom and bust. Like Richie, I haven't talked to him about this, but I know for a fact like he won't have stopped training during this. He's just going to change the way he does things slightly so he can keep that forward momentum and keep going.
Yep.
Would that be
Right.
right?
Yeah. Spot on. Spot on.
It's like I know. It's
Mr.
like I know a
Training
guy. So just quickly before we wrap up in the next 5 minutes, I just wanted to talk about this diagnosis of the arthritis. So I'm imagining Drew's got this diagnosis from having probably seen a doctor or physio maybe and being told to go get some x-rays. And I think it's just really important to highlight that having signs, having changes to your morphology, so changes to the structure, which can be bone and cartilage, all the stuff we've talked about before. Having those changes on a scan does not necessarily mean it's going to cause any type of pain or dysfunction. We've talked a lot about pain science in previous episodes, so don't have time to go into it all here and now. But basically, like just because you have some of those changes doesn't mean that that's the cause of your pain. So I think it's tempting to think that, and diagnostically life would be much simpler. I wish I could be someone who could just say like, yeah, get everything scanned, then I wouldn't have to know as much and do as much brain work every time a patient comes in. But it's one of those things where you might have like the arthritis may have been there for, well, changes to the cartilage may have been there for a long time, and then you develop knee pain, and then you look on there and you think, oh, it's because the arthritis, now I have pain, but that could have been there for years, and now it's just a incidental finding when you get these scans. So there's a real push, and this is coming from the GP community, but also like the Australian Physio Association is really big now, and like you don't scan knees and ankles, like weight bearing joints, for non-traumatic injuries. You just like don't like for x-rays for arthritis, like you just don't do it because it just doesn't help people. It makes them more
Yeah.
freaked out and thinking that they need knee replacements. And you hear those stories of people seeing doctors and saying they have the knees of an 80-year-old, like all this stuff that just creates such a unfortunate, like it once you hear that, like it's stuck in your head. It's really hard to you can't like unthink that. And so it then becomes this real challenge to get past that. But the fantastic thing that we can see here from Drew's story is that he's got into the app, he's doing phase 1, and he's done day 3 of week 2, and so far loving the workouts and the body feels great. So I guess this is just a really good example of someone who's like got this sort of background, got this like have these concerns, but now is like cracking on and feeling better for it. And for people who do have these sort of like diagnosis, like exercise is the best thing you can do, and it will make you feel so much better. So great result.
Awesome. Great for thank you for coming in today, Phil. It was great to have somebody else to talk to on this show and lead the way. Now that Rad and Yanni aren't here, it was a great topic. I love hearing these stories as well, and I love hearing a great sort of explanation from you as to why they're going through this and what
I
they
just
can do.
do want to just very quickly just cover one quick thing that I think is really common for the Unity audience, which is that often people do come in for this, like they find the flexibility work online. They think like, oh, I don't stretch enough, I'm not like mobile enough, I'm not flexible enough, and that's the issue, like that's the cause of all my pain. But it's just part of the picture, and often with these type of things, like it is end of range and really pushing through range that can be one of the most aggravating things. So I'm really stoked to see that he's incorporating the flexibility, but he's also doing the strength work, because when it comes to particularly joint pain, building strength and control around an area is so important. You want to build that strength control before necessarily pushing to like the outer extremes to try and help pain. So I just wanted to highlight that like particularly for these type of things, flexibility is often not the thing that will make you suddenly better. It's going to be the strength training, but then incorporating mobility and incorporating movement is how you get there. So nice one, Drew. Thanks for your comment. And just to point out to anyone who like on the UMS Movement Mastermind, like that's just a comment. Like he was one out of probably 30 people there who replied to Rad asking what brought you here. So hopefully you can see that, like, if you guys ask questions and you put comments out there, like, we really want to help you with your goals. So, and Drew, if you have any follow-up questions, hit us up.
Alrighty. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. I'll see you again tomorrow, hopefully with Rad, for another show.
And just quickly, quick plug, if you like hearing me speak, and I've had actually some comments on, I had a comment on YouTube, I think, from one of the podcasts that I did, which just made my partner just laugh because it's exactly how she feels. But this guy started using me as like a way of getting to sleep, which I found a bit unfortunate, like a bit offensive. But he's like, you just have a nice voice and I like hearing you speak. So he's using me as a sleep aid. So if either you want to know more about injury prevention and all things physio and strength and conditioning, then check out the Things I Wish My Patients Knew podcast. But also, if you're having trouble sleeping, maybe putting me on a loop will
Phil
sort that
Lullaby.
right out.
I like it.
Nice one, Rich. So good to see you. See you next week.
See you guys.